The boy's screams had echoed across the zoo, freezing visitors in their tracks. Parents clutched their children tightly, shielding their eyes from the terrifying scene. The lion, a massive male with a golden mane, prowled cautiously toward the boy, who sat trembling on the ground, too shocked to cry. The crowd watched helplessly, their collective fear palpable. A woman near the enclosure broke the silence, yelling for someone to do something. A zookeeper rushed to the scene, his face pale, but it wasn't clear if he was there to help or explain what had just happened. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Some blamed negligence, others wondered if the worker had acted intentionally. Security guards scrambled to contain the chaos, but the crowd was already taking videos and demanding answers. Who was the boy? And why had this happened? Suspicion hung thick in the air, and the zoo's serene facade began to crumble. The boy's mother pushed through the crowd, her voice shaking as she called his name. Her desperation cut through the chaos, but the zoo staff held her back, fearing she might make things worse. Inside the enclosure, the lion had stopped pacing. Its sharp eyes were locked on the child, who remained frozen like prey caught in the predator's gaze. Meanwhile, whispers of conspiracy grew louder. Some visitors claimed they saw the worker arguing with another staff member moments before the incident. Others swore they'd noticed him acting strangely all morning. A man in the crowd muttered about safety protocols and demanded answers from a bewildered staff member. The tension spread like wildfire, drawing attention away from the immediate danger. At the same time, inside the zoo's control room, panicked voices filled the air as staff scrambled to figure out how this could have happened. Security footage was being reviewed, but something about the worker's behavior didn't add up. Who was he, really? The boy's mother, now in tears, pleaded with the guards to act faster. Her words were sharp, but her fear was sharper. Each passing second felt like an eternity, and every unanswered question only deepened the mystery. The lion inched closer, its muscles tensing with every deliberate step. The boy finally let out a shaky sob, breaking the fragile silence inside the enclosure. The crowd collectively held its breath, some turning away, while others gripped their phones, unable to look away from the unfolding nightmare. The zookeeper nearest the scene whispered into his radio, his hand trembling as he relayed the urgency of the situation. "We need the tranquilizer team now," he said, his voice cracking under the pressure. But there was no response. Something was wrong, either with the system or the team's location. Panic flashed across his face as he looked back at the enclosure. In the crowd, a young woman whispered to her friend that the worker who threw the boy had vanished. "He just walked off," she said, her voice laced with disbelief. Another visitor overheard and added, "No one's seen him since. What kind of person does that?" Inside the control room, the footage revealed a chilling detail. The worker had been talking to the boy moments before the incident, kneeling to his level and pointing toward the lion's enclosure. But the sound was missing, and no one could tell what was said. The staff exchanged uneasy glances. The scene felt calculated, deliberate, as if this wasn't an accident at all. Back at the enclosure, the lion stopped, lowering its massive head as it sniffed the air. The boy whimpered, his small frame shaking violently. His mother screamed again, her voice hoarse and raw, pleading for someone to do something. Time felt like it was slowing down, every second dragging the crowd closer to a breaking point. Just as the lion crouched lower, its tail flicking with tense precision, a sudden commotion erupted from the opposite side of the enclosure. A second figure, barely noticeable at first, appeared near the perimeter fence. The crowd gasped, their attention shifting. It was the missing worker. His uniform was torn, his face scratched, and he looked disoriented. He staggered forward, holding something in his hands, a set of keys and what appeared to be a small device. The zookeeper closest to the fence shouted at him, demanding answers, but the worker ignored him. Instead, he moved with unsettling calm toward a service gate leading into the lion's enclosure. The gate creaked as he unlocked it, stepping inside without hesitation. The lion turned sharply at the sound, its attention snapping away from the boy. It let out a low growl, the deep vibration cutting through the air. The worker didn't flinch. Instead, he crouched slightly, raising the device in his hand as if trying to lure the lion toward him. The boy's mother screamed louder now, realizing what was happening. "What is he doing? Stop him," she cried, her voice cracking with fear. Security guards rushed to intervene, but the worker had already moved deeper into the enclosure. The lion, torn between the two figures in its territory, hesitated, its sharp eyes darting back and forth. In the control room, the footage rewound again and again. Something about the worker's actions didn't match the man they thought they knew. His employee file was being reviewed, and an unsettling discovery was made. He hadn't been on the payroll for months. The lion's growl grew louder as it locked onto the worker, who was now kneeling and holding out the device. It emitted a faint, high-pitched sound, barely audible to the human ear. The animal hesitated, its powerful body tense with indecision. The boy, still frozen in place, stared wide-eyed at the worker, who gave him a quick, almost imperceptible nod. The crowd erupted in chaos as a team of tranquilizer specialists finally arrived, setting up their equipment in record time. But before they could act, the lion made its move, not toward the boy, but toward the worker. With a sudden, terrifying burst of speed, the animal lunged. The crowd screamed as the worker dropped the device and threw himself to the ground, narrowly avoiding the lion's massive paws. The zookeeper seized the moment, rushing into the enclosure and scooping up the boy. The mother collapsed in relief as her son was carried to safety, sobbing uncontrollably in her arms. But the tension wasn't over. Back in the enclosure, the lion had turned its attention back to the fallen worker, who was scrambling to his feet. The tranquilizer team fired, and the lion staggered before collapsing in a heap, its roar fading into silence. The crowd cheered, but the relief was short-lived. Security guards detained the worker as he was led away, his calm demeanor replaced with defiance. "You don't understand," he said, his voice eerily composed. "This isn't over." Later, as investigators pieced together the events, they discovered the device was designed to emit sounds that agitated large predators. The worker had ties to an activist group, their motives unclear but unsettling. Just when it seemed the ordeal was over, an officer monitoring the security feed noticed something chilling. The worker had planted another device, this one hidden near a different enclosure. The barista smiled warmly as they accepted the impromptu tip jar, their hands trembling slightly from the unexpected gesture. "Thank you," they said, their voice filled with genuine gratitude. The regulars exchanged knowing looks, sharing in the unspoken camaraderie of having witnessed and overcome a shared moment of tension. As the atmosphere lightened, the coffee shop buzzed with laughter and conversations once again. A young woman at a nearby table leaned over to the barista and said, "You handled that so well. I would have lost it." The barista chuckled, wiping down the counter. "You get used to it," they replied, though the hint of relief in their eyes suggested otherwise. Meanwhile, Karen, still outside, gestured wildly on her phone, her voice muffled by the glass. A few customers glanced at her, but most ignored her, choosing to focus on the warmth and connection now filling the room. The moment had passed, and the coffee shop had reclaimed its sense of calm. Karen stood frozen, the sarcastic note crumpled in her fist as the crowd's laughter echoed in her ears. Her face turned red with a mix of anger and humiliation, and she glared at the security guard as if searching for someone to blame. "This is outrageous," she shouted, pointing at the tow truck. "You can't just..." The tow truck driver cut her off with a shrug. "Ma'am, the rules are clear. You parked in a fire lane and blocked 2 other cars. We're just doing our job." Karen spun around to the police officer, her tone shifting to a pleading one. "This is all a misunderstanding. I was only inside for a few minutes." The officer raised an eyebrow, his expression calm but firm. "I understand, ma'am, but several witnesses reported the obstruction, and the fire lane violation is non-negotiable. Here's your citation." He handed her the ticket, his professional demeanor unshaken by her protests.